do's and do not things to do when we're creating digital content. The other one is the requirements, the standard requirements of digital accessibility. It has to do of the condition of our multimedia when we're uploading some videos, or the condition of the images when we're opening some images. Also, when we're creating documents, and it's very important for inclusion in the labor force. Some of the enterprises, some of the firms are hiring persons with disability to work with us. And normally in the working environment, we use software like Word or PDF to work among ourselves. When we're creating a Word document or a presentation in PowerPoint, those documents can be accessible. So if we really want to offer an opportunity of persons with disabilities to work within our enterprise, within our organization, we need to make a statement and a policy within the organization that all the documents, the working documents that we create, they need to be accessible. If not, if those documents are not accessible, we're excluding and we're taking away the opportunity of the person with disability working in the organization to really interact with the other co-workers. So besides the tips, besides the requirements of the standards, we're also going to go through what are the important stuff that we need to take into account when we're creating digital documents in a normal working environment, when we're using Word, when we're using PowerPoint or Excel presentations. And finally, some accessibility. The accessibility checker is in the menu at the far end of near the help menu, and you have an accessibility checker. So that's the kind of features that no one knows that exists, but if you knew that when you're creating a PowerPoint presentation or you're creating a Word document, there's an accessibility checker, and you used yourself to use those checkers, you really are moving towards a much more inclusive environment and digital environment. So we're going to talk about that too. So generally on the tips, general tips about accessibility. So what we did in the parts of the tips is I'm presenting some very general these impairments. We're not going to talk about disabilities, but some general impairments. And when you are creating a document, what are the do's and do not things to do when you're creating this kind of content? So for instance, for the autistic spectrum, the general recommendation are to use simple colors. Do not use flashy colors because flashy colors can be very distracting. So people with cognitive impairment, they really get distracted by very flashy or fluorescent colors. So use simple colors. Write plain text. And I don't know here in Egypt, for instance, in Latin America, we love to use metaphors. Use plain text, but people cannot understand, some people do not understand sarcasm. So try to use plain text to try to communicate an idea. Simple sentence and bullets. And what I love about these tips is that they not only work for some kind of impairments, but they work for everyone. If you're trying to communicate using very simple and bullet sentences, the information is much better communicate for everyone. The buttons make them descriptive. If we want the audience to interact with us and we put a button, let the button be very clear and very descriptive, as well as build simple and consistent layouts. The do not do for a spectrum of autism is what the contrary normally. Not use bright and contrasting colors, figures of speech, that different languages, that maybe it could create some distraction to your audience. Wall of text. I know that in the media and editing world with newspapers, it's very useful to use the very columns to try to present some information. But it even happened to us when we're trying to read a newspaper with a lot of columns. It gets very tiring for us too. So when we're creating digital content, we do not have to save on paper. We're doing it digitally, so try to avoid the wall of text. Make the bottoms vague and unpredictable. Click here. Click here. What is going to happen if I click here? So we have to be very clear on our instructions and build complex or cluttered layouts. We have to avoid that totally for that kind of spectrum. For screen reader, for people with a visual impairment, for people who are low vision or blind, what we have to do while we're creating digital document is to describe the image that we provide or the transcript of the videos. When we're putting an image in your PowerPoint presentation, like the image you can see in this presentation, there's a way to put an alternative text. So the persons using screen readers to access the information that we are presented will have the same information that we have. So if we're going to put any kind of image, even if it's a logo, in our presentation, in our document that is important and that is communicating some important information, we always need to add some alternative text to the image and the graphs. Follow a linear logical layout, because assistive technology will interpret the information from left to right. So it is important that we use that layout, so the assistive technology will read the information in our documents in a logical manner. While that's the case for the web, but use structured content in HTML. We saw that yesterday. Build for keyboard use only, that we also saw yesterday, but that is important when we're creating a PDF document. When we're creating a PDF document, we have to make sure that we can access all the components of your document using only keyboard. There are persons that do not use the mouse. If I have a mobility problem, or if I am consulting my information with a screen reader, I won't use a mouse. I will use my keyboard. So make sure that all the documents can be consulted, and all the parts of the document can be consulted using only the keyboard. And write descriptive links and headings. And this is also a tip that helps everyone. I don't know if it happens to you. Some titles in my documents, and 3 days later I don't remember what the document was about, because my title was not descriptive enough. So try, when you're saving documents, try to be very descriptive in the titles, because later on you will remember what the document was about, but also persons using screen readers will know what the information is about and will open or not the content of the document. To avoid, when you're thinking about persons with visual impairment that use screen readers, is only show information through the images. We need to include some alternative text to the images. Spread content all over the place. We need to also avoid to spread content all over the place that it is not logically presented within the document. And is PowerPoint presentation, try to put your information in a logical manner, because if we spread information all over the document, a person using assistive technology can get lost and do not really understand what we're trying to communicate. At the end, those tips, when we're creating a document, and this is not very difficult, everyone in this room can do that, but when we're creating digital content, we have to think that the person who is going to read my information is using a keyboard, is not using a mouse, and is using assistive technology. Do not rely on text size and placement of structure, and this happens a lot when we rely on the size of the font to really put some logic or information in some kind of structure. Is when we use a title and we put very big titles to really try to make sense of our document. Try to avoid that. Use the style of the worksheet as title, because if we use the style that is embedded in the software, the assistive technology recognizes that we're in a title. So the screen reader will tell me title and will read me what we wrote as a title. But if we only use size to present a title, the reader or the user that is not seeing the document, that is using a screen reader, will never understand that what we're presenting is a title, because the assistive technology is not sensitive to the size. It is sensitive to the style that we're putting in our document, but not of the size. So try to avoid to rely on size, to placement of structure. First the mouse, like we saw 2 minutes ago, and write uninformative links. It is very common that when we're putting a link, an hyperlink in a document, we are assuming that the people is reading the document is seeing that the link is underlined And we don't really care that the address when we're putting the hyperlink doesn't mean anything, because we're relying what is coming in the document. Person using screen reader, the screen reader will read to the user what is underlined. So it is very important to rewrite a very clear link or heading for the links. For the person who has low vision, we have to use colors and contrast of colors that are accessible. We saw yesterday, and Mr. Shadi show us some of the available tools free online that we can use to check if the contrast of the colors that we are using are adequate or not. If we use gray on white, for instance, or very, very low contrast, persons with low vision will not understand the information that we're trying to explain. So try to avoid, use good color contrast and readable font size. Also, a combination of color and shapes. What happens if we only use color to communicate? Persons that are colorblind won't understand. So, for instance, when we have the start button, put not only the color, the green color, but also use text and the color to try to communicate something. And we will continue with the linear logical layout. That's very important for any kind of impairments, as well as the clear buttons and notifications. For person with low vision, we have to try to avoid, and it's straightforward, the use of low color. Yes. That one? That's the one? What does it say? Yes. So that's the one. Perfect. Thank you. So use low color contrast we have to avoid. We have to avoid to bury information in downloads. When we put a lot of downloads and all the downloads links are not very clear, person can easily get lost within our documentation. Only use color. We have to avoid the use of color only. And I put some of the colors. What happened, for instance, in Canada, for the lights of the streets, they're using, besides color, shapes. What happens if a person is colorblind and they do not see a but when you are driving and you see a red light and you're colorblind, you can have an accident. So use shapes besides colors, and what they're doing in Canada is they're having built new lights where it's red and squared form, yellow is a round and yellow, and the green will be in a triangle. So the persons that are colorblind will see that the triangle is light up, so it means that you can go ahead, besides of the color. So try to avoid only color to give information to others. And separate action from their context. Sometimes we put buttons and we put the action within the bottom of the shape. We need to try to avoid that. For the same person that have low vision can maybe not understand what we're trying to communicate. For the person with physical or motor disabilities, try to make larger clickable actions. And that also helps everyone. When we put a presentation and the user needs to have a very, very narrow space to do an action, if you have a physical impairment or if you have low vision, it can be very stressful. So try to make large clickable actions and give some space to the field. When we have tables, when we have that kind of information, put some space on it. We're talking about digital content, so again, I will emphasize that we do not have to spare on space or paper. So use a lot of space, put a lot of field between the spaces. Like that, people will have a better understanding of the information that we're trying to communicate. Provide shortcuts also. It's better for the person who have a physical or a motor disability. If I can have a shortcut, it will be better than go through the whole document. For instance, one of the shortcuts is to put table of contents at the beginning of any document. For the people that are using a assisted software to serve a document, It's very tiring to go through the whole document. If I want to go to the chapter number 20, which is in page 200. So use table of contents, use those kind of shortcuts so any user can really go and use the shortcut to go to the information they want. And again, I cannot stress enough that those tips, even though they were thought for some kind of impairments, it's very useful tips for anyone, and it makes your communication easier and much agreeable for everyone. To avoid precision, it's also kind of the contrary that we just saw earlier. Very dynamic. Put some dynamics in your documents, and it's very often used in websites. The designers love dynamics and moving objects in a website, and we really need to avoid the dynamics, if we can, in our content. For deaf or hard of hearing, the recommendation and tips is write plain text. Also, use subtitles. The good news is if you're uploading, for instance, some videos and you're using a YouTube platform, now the YouTube platform enables you to put some closed caption directly. They're not perfect because they're using the Google Translator for giving us those subtitles. So sometimes the translator in the subtitles are not great, but at least it will give you, the person who have a hearing impairment, the ability of know what the content is about. Accessible content at the end is about including everyone in the information that we are presenting. So if we're going to upload some videos online, we need to make sure that we have either subtitles or the transcript. A lot of time we work in Word, the content of our video, and then we create a video based on the content that we created on a Word document. So upload the transcript, and then persons who have hearing impairment will have the same information that we're going to have. Avoid complicated words and figures of speech, because people who are deaf difficulties, really those kind of superfluous comments do not really get us where we want to go or communicate what we want to communicate. Put content in audio or video only, because our person will really need to have the subtitles. Make complex layouts. It's all about simplicity. It's all about less is better. So less is better, clear is better, and short sentences, so everyone really can understand what we're trying to communicate. For persons with dyslexia or the spectrum of dyslexia, we recommend to use diagrams to support the text, which again is very useful with people with cognitive problems and also for kids. When we're trying to communicate and to teach kids some information, it is very recommended to use images to support the text. Of course, we need both, because images without text won't be accessible as well. But try to use images to support the text, or diagrams to support the text. Align text to the left. Sometimes it was very fashionable to use justified text, but when we use a magnifier and we really amplify the size of the font to 200%, and we have used justified text, you can get lost in the information. So do not justify your text, just put your text, keep it consistent to the left or to the right. So persons with dyslexia or persons that have low vision and use magnifiers cannot get lost in our documents. Again, that are the tips and the considerations that you have to take into consideration. Consider producing material in other formats. So many times when we are creating a document or we are creating content, if it's possible, consider to have an audio version, for instance, of your document. So a person can learn and can hear the audio of your content at the same time that they are reading it. Some of the assistive technology that we can find in the market for dyslexia, so underline while you're hearing the content that you're hearing is being underlined at the same time. So persons who have difficulty reading really can get those kind of things, find those kind of things very helpful. And let user change the contrast between background and text. And that's, don't give them the contrast, use a normal, accessible contrast, and let the people being able to change the contrast at their will. Try to avoid large block of text. Again, we'll have the same tips over and over because it really something very vertical and transparent that helps everyone. So also for the spectrum of dyslexia, it is recommended to use large block of text to avoid, heavy text. Underline words and use italics because also we can get lost in the interpretation of the information. Give reminders, force user to remember things. If we are repeating the same action in other pages, rewrite the instructions. Don't assume that the reader or our user will remember what the instruction that they have to do. So if we're repeating the same action in 3 or the 4th page further, that we have the same action or the same exercise, rewrite the instructions. Avoid to rely that the user will remember what they have to do. And put too much information in one place. That we have also avoid. So what we just talked about are general tips that anyone in this room can do while creating a document. So the good thing is tomorrow when we'll be creating a document, or tomorrow when Hector is going to put the logo of UNESCO in any paper, he will know that if he does not put an alternative text on the logo, it's not going to be accessible or inclusive in his information. And it's something that everyone can do in this group. And those tips comes from the standards. There's specific standards that we need to follow for accessible content. And those standards, even though they were created for accessibility in web environment, in internet environment, we can perfectly well do them in other kind of digital formats. So the general requirements, and some of them are overlapping with the requirements that we saw yesterday, and what we just talk about the tips is very clearly, no? For all non-text content, we have to present an alternative text. So we have this image of a little dog. So what is the image about? That's the kind of information that we have to put on the alternative text. If the dog is trying to communicate something, we just have to put dog. But if the dog really what he's trying to communicate is another thing, try to put in the alternative text the information that we're trying to communicate through the image, not only the image. No, it doesn't. If I see the logo at the ITU and I'll tell you world with a flash, red flash, doesn't mean anything, and I'm describing the image. But really, what I want to communicate with the image is logo of the ITU. So it is very important that we describe what the image is about, and if there is some text in the image, we have to also repeat the text in the image, so everyone is included in the information. So explain it, describe it, and it's nothing new, ignore it, because we don't need, less is more, and we do not need too much information, or information that is not really needed. When we're talking about multimedia, what we have to do, and in multimedia we have two kinds of scenarios. We have audio that we upload online, or we use audio documents or the audio files, and we have video. For both, the requirements is to have a transcription. So the standards will talk about 3 levels of accessibility. The minimum level is A. So what is a minimum level? If I have an audio file or a video file, we need to have the transcript of what's content in the file. That's the minimum accessibility requirement. Have subtitles, as we see, if we have a video content, we need to include subtitles in the content, and that's for a level of accessibility A. If it's this video, we need to include audio description. If the silence are important. The silence are important when we're watching something. So it's very important to include audio description of what's happening in the video if there's no dialogue on it, as well as caption. No? When we're providing live audio content, we need to include live captions. So this is a requirement level 2. AA. Why? Because it's not as easy as it comes. There are specialized softwares that are hearing the text and putting some caption at the same time, but we have to spend a little bit more money to have that kind of software. Sometimes we can see in international meetings that there are people typing at the same time that they're hearing what we're talking about. So that's a level of accessibility AA, when we have caption provided in live audio. So if the minimum accepted standard is A. So if in a meeting like this, where we have live audio, accessibility will require us to have the presentation. So you can have a little bit of information on what was talked about. In a AA level of accessibility, we really need to have live captioning of what's happening, synchronized of what is happening in the video, in the audio, or the stenography. No? That's also a very common use for web accessibility. The pre-recorded video also needed audio description, and this is easier because it's pre-recorded. So when you're going to communicate through an audio file that is pre-recorded, we need to include pre-recorded audio description. And at the end, like we had this morning, a AAA level of conformance of accessibility for any live audio will need to be description in live language. So you can see that the level of accessibility, the conformance of accessibility goes through very easy, include some captioning, include some transcript of what we're seeing, hearing in the multimedia content, to having live captioning if it's live audio, which is a little bit more difficult, but it's the second level AA of accessibility. And then we can get to the level AAA of accessibility, which really needs to have a translation, live translation in languages. So there's a parallel session now that we're talking about what are the requirements in sessions like this one to be them totally accessible, and they will talk not only of the need of the existence of accessibility in the physical space, like the ramps, but also the importance of having live description and translation in languages. Also, as we saw a few minutes ago, do not use colors as the only mean to distinguish visual elements. I always bring these two charts. For instance, the chart on my right, a person who is colorblind will never understand the information. For them it will be a circle, all the colors will mix, and even though we put the elements of every color, for them it will be the same because they don't distinguish color. So to not only use color to try to communicate information, use the label or the text near the color that we want to, or an element, a visual element that do not depend on color to try to communicate information. No? So the graph in the right hand side is an accessible one because people that are colorblind maybe won't see the colors, but will perfectly well read the product and the amount, the percentage that every color represents. Yes?
In my understanding, there are types of color blindness, right?
Yes.
So I want to ask about the exact colors to use for more color accessibility and the bad or good color combinations to use.
Yes. So and I will show you some valid tools that we can find online to check the contrast, the color contrast. Those tips, what they're trying to tell you is, even though there's different types of color blindness, if I put an information like that, do not matter what color blindness you have, you'll understand the information. That's why some of the software now that we encounter in our laptops, in our phones, they allow the user to change the contrast of your colors. So the good thing is that now if I'm colorblind and have a smartphone or a laptop, I can use, in the navigator tools even, I can use the contrast that better fits me. So that's why do not use a specific contrast that you think that will be a better and more accessible content. Let the user switch the contrast to their benefit, but just try to use alternative forms to communicate besides colors. No? The thing with color blindness is like cognitive disabilities. The spectrum is so broad that we try to give you some general tips that will help the most population. This is just what you were talking about, the contrast checker. That's one of many. If you put in your Google search contrast checkers, you can see various tools available and free online that you can use to check the contrast, if it passes or not. So specifically this contrast checker, if you put the computer numbers of the colors, it will tell you if the contrast is good and is passing according to the standard. No? So you can do that, of course you can do that. It's a very good thing to check the colors, and it's a very good tools for designers. If you're not a designer and you're just trying to communicate, avoid the use of very pale colors, try to use a normal contrast. The user at the end, some of the time when we're talking about contrast is what happens if should I offer my user a screen reader, for instance? Well, if I'm blind and I want to go through a digital document, I will buy the software that enables me to get the content. Now, if like I'm me and I want to surf the net, we'll have to buy a computer to be able to surf the net. So let the user buy the technology that they need to get and to communicate and to consult your content, but try to create content that is accessible for everyone. So that's a control checker that you can use. And what about the document and the format that we normally use? And you will see that specifically in Office and PDF documents that are normally the software that we all use in our offices, the ways to make those contents accessible are very easy. No? First of all, the document needs to have also always a descriptive title. So it's something for you maybe very straightforward, but we really sometimes forget to put very descriptive and clear titles. So one of the accessibility requirements to have accessible documents is to have descriptive titles of its contents. Language. Also, when we're creating a document, it is important to specify the language. Normally we never do that, because when we open a document, normally the software is in the language that we usually work, and we start writing any information in Arabic or Spanish or whatever. It is important that we go to the menu and we specify the language, because if our person is using as assistive technology, the assistive technology will start reading the document in the language that we pre-selected beforehand. So even though my document is in English, but I didn't specify the language, maybe my screen reader will start reading the document with a Spanish accent, which can very easily lose the person who's consulting the information. So go to the menu and specify the language in which the document is being elaborated. And also, if I have a small word in English, if we use my document in Spanish and I use a small word in English, highlight the word and specify that only that word is in English. So that's also a tip of accessibility, and the people using screen readers will really appreciate if we take the time to specify the language in which our documents are being elaborated. We'll always come back to the alternative text. We use in a lot of our infographics, in a lot of our document, we use graphs as well as we use charts, graphs or images. Always add the alternative text. In a graph, in a chart, in my Excel or in my Word, there's a way to add alternative text to the graph. So when we're adding an alternative text to a chart, we can put a title of the chart, but also there's a space to describe the information. So try to describe the information. Here we have sometimes problems in some of the countries that you have a very, very big graph or spread Excel sheets that have a lot of information. Maybe no one needs to have all the information, but what we really need to do is in the description of the information, communicate what the information is about. So if I'm not an engineer, for example, and I'm looking through a presentation designed for engineers, and I fell upon a graph that I don't understand, well, I don't need all the information of what the graph is about, but at least I need a description that me as anyone else in the room could understand what the graph is about. So that's the description that we're looking for complex graphs, complex charts, or images. The use of headers also is super important. As we told in the tips, do not use font or size to try to give some form to your documents. In Office, as well as in Adobe, you have the style sheets, and you need to use them. You need to put header, you need to put title, you need to put the subtitles, and then you can play with the size and the colors of your titles or subtitles. But it is important while we're doing a document that we specify that that part of sentence is a title or a header or a subtitle, because those styles are compatible with the assistive technologies, and the user will really appreciate and really comprehend the information that we're presented. So use the header at all time if it's possible. And it's very easy to do. Really, it's nothing out of the ordinary. Again, we will repeat, use logical reading order regardless of the design that you want to give to your document. The assistive technology are not sensitive to your wishes or your designs. They will read the document in a certain order. So be very sensible to the order that the assistive technology will start reading your document, and regardless of the design, use a logical reading order, as well as adequate table structures. And this is a very important tip when you're doing spreadsheets in Excel. For instance, avoid combined cells, because the combined cell can lose a person that is using a screen reader. So when we're doing a table, the structure of the table should be very straightforward. We have cells that are headers, and we have cells that contain data. So two simple tables where the user can easily identify which cells are presenting with a header and which cells are presenting with data. So everyone really can understand the information that we are presenting. Again, do not depend on color, and that's something that we'll be seeing through all the tips of accessibility digital content. Do not depend on color to transmit information, and the links will also, it's also a requirement of accessibility. The links must provide a clear description of where we're going. So do not assume that because a person is looking at the document and because the person is seeing that there's a change in contrast, they will know that there's a link and where we're going with the link. So be very descriptive of the links that we're using. Avoid non-accessible content. Information should not be offered through watermarks. And before there was the fashion of confidential, and we use watermarks to give some information that on one hand we want you to know that it was confidential, but why the use of watermarks if we don't really want to communicate if it's confidential or not? So try to avoid the use of watermarks, of floating objects, of contents headless or footless, because persons with using accessible technology will not get that information. It's the same thing when we use bold or italics fonts to try to send some information. So try to avoid those kind of non-accessible contents, as well as try always to put a table of contents. For a document of more than 10 pages, it is recommended to use a table of contents or markers in the case of the PDF in order to make your content much more accessible. And you can stop me if you want. So, I mean, what I like about this presentation or this workshop is those tips are super easy to comply. Really, once you know that it is important to not justify your content, to avoid the use only the use of color to present information, to put straightforward and descriptive titles, to use the header and the styles that are offered with those softwares, it is very easy to do, and it really makes a difference for the person that are using assistive technology and want to consult the information that we are presenting. Specifically for Office and for Adobe, the software include a validation. So for instance, if we're in Word, but the same for PowerPoint or Excel, you go to File and you can check the accessibility problems of the document. So I really invite you to use the checkers, because if you use the checkers, if you see the problem of accessibility that your document have, you can really oblige yourself to create better and more inclusive content. For instance, the accessibility checker will tell you if you have an image without alternative text. The accessibility checker will tell you if you have a lot of blank space. Blank space is a little bit the same as headers. If I'm trying to give some structure to my document, avoid to use the enter and the space bar to move my content or to give structure to my document. Why? Because a screen reader, if I use the space bar to center, for instance, my title, the screen reader will read blank space, blank space, blank, and every blank space that we put in the document will be read by the assistive technology as a blank space. So it's not very accessible to a person that if we use the space bar to center my title, to have 17, 20 times be reading blank space. So use the option of center the content in order to avoid that kind of accessibility issue. So when we use the accessibility checkers, it will tell us how many blank space we have in a document. So as minimum as we can have of blank space, it's much more inclusive and accessible. In PDF it's the same. The PDF reader or the Acrobat DC does have an accessibility checker. Of course, to remediate accessibility in a PDF document, sometimes it's much more difficult than in a Word or Microsoft document, but there is a way to have an accessibility checker on our PDF files and a way to remediate these accessibility problems. So the good thing about those validators is that not only they will point out what's the problem of accessibility of your document, but they will tell you how to remediate the problem of accessibility. So I invite you to use those checkers to check really if what the content we're creating is accessible or not, and try to avoid those kind of minimum problems of accessibility. And how to avoid them is super easy, to just implement the tips that I just talked to you about, and it's very simple, very straightforward way to create content that is very accessible and inclusive for everyone. Finally, what happens in social media? What happens when we upload information on Facebook or on Twitter? Both Twitter, Facebook, and I didn't include here YouTube, but I can also give you some of the tips of the YouTube, which is super easy because you only have to put the accessibility features for Facebook or accessibility features in Twitter or in YouTube, and they will tell you how to upload image description, for instance, for all the images that we upload in Facebook. This is part of the instruction to have accessible images in Facebook, but I will give it to you. As you can see, it's super easy. And also how to include captions in your videos. And the potential is, if we try and stop and think a bit of how many information is shared on these platforms, the amount of information that we try to present and to expose of the use with the use of these platforms, it is very important that we include these accessibility features, because all the photos that in all your Facebook profiles will be uploaded tomorrow because you weren't here in the event, you're excluding all the people using assistive technology of that information if we do not put a description of the photo or a closed caption on the video. And it's not like if I'm asking you to upload and really translate everything that is in the video. The only thing you have to do is habilitate the closed caption already embedded in the software of Facebook, and you can upload multimedia in an accessible manner. The same happens in Twitter. Twitter is a very common social media used to communicate, so there is a way to add alternative text in the features that we're using on Twitter. I didn't include here the instructions for having the closed caption feature of YouTube, but it's there and it's very easy and straightforward to use. So when you're uploading information in the social media, you have to look out for their accessibility features, and they'll be there. What is happening, and the good news is, in the United States, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, obliged all those platforms developers to include accessibility features. And that is why today we have a Microsoft software with the accessibility validations. We have Adobe that included accessibility validation. And those validators, you can find them in the versions from 2010 onwards. All those versions of Office and Adobe included the validators. And the same thing happened with the social media. All these social media includes accessibility features. So now that you know, I really invite you to check in these platforms, put on the search engine accessibility, and it will be very clearly state and show you what are the steps that we need to do in order to create accessible content and really communicate for everyone and include everyone in our digital communications. I don't know if you have any question. Well, thank you very much. That was really the tips I wanted to share with you in this workshop, and really invited you to create digital content. After tomorrow, when we'll go out of this door, you will have this information. This information is yours, and you cannot unknow that information. So every time that you create a document, now you will know what are the tips, what are the things that I need to do to create and to make accessible documents. And also it is an invitation in your organization to share those tips with everyone in the organization, because there are very easy steps, very easy things to do, very easy steps to comply, and we really have a difference in the accessibility of our documents. Another exercise that I invite you to do, if you're using Adobe has a screen reader. So once you finish a document, you can download the NVDA, which is a free and online tool for screen readers, or as well as the screen readers that is included in your software of your tablet, of your smartphone, and try to go through your documents using a screen reader, and you will see the problems of accessibility that normally your documents can have. So use the checkers. The table is set for us to create digital content, so to create digital accessible content. So use the checkers that are available, use those kind of tips that you have and you will have once you get the presentation, and really communicate and create digital content inclusive and available for everyone. Thank you very much. Hector? That's it.
All right, well, please join me in giving Monica another round of applause, please. So, well, thank you all. I think we've come to the end of this session on accessible websites. As Monica said quite eloquently, you cannot unlearn what you've already learned. And so I think each of us will probably feel charged with a certain responsibility each time we go forward and we have content to upload. At this point, I'd just like to, again, express words of appreciation to our hosts, the American University in Cairo, the organizing team, all the hard work that has gone into it. Of course, our sponsors, the MCIT, the Ministry of Education, NTRA, the ICT Trust Fund, and of course to you, the audience, also the interpreters, and both Arabic, English, and also the sign language, and of course the videographers who are recording this information. I think it will be quite a challenge captioning all of this, but now we know what we have to do. So without any further ado, once again, thank you, and you'll be hearing from us. We have your emails, so we'll be communicating information to you about the plans for 2018. And you have our cards. Please feel free at any time to call us. This issue of people with disabilities is something which is very close to our hearts. It's something which we very much believe in, we want to work on, and consider us your partner in this. Thank you very much, all.